Hello everyone, welcome to the session. So in this particular session, we're going to continue learning about the page object model, right? But first, as usual, let's have a quick recap of what we have learned in the previous session. Okay, so in the previous session, we discussed about the page object model and we understood why exactly it is needed, right? We also had a look at the typical structure of POM and we also tried to implement it using the simple approach. We understood that there are multiple approaches to do that. We applied the simple approach on it. Okay, coming to today's particular session agenda, we'll look at another way of implementing the page object model, which is page factory, right? Then we'll apply the concept, we'll use it and we'll apply it on the login test case scenario. Okay, let's get started. So in the previous session, we learned that the object model, the page object model, is a design pattern that reduces the code duplication and it improves the test case maintenance altogether, right? And we also understood that in the context of automation testing, you can think of design pattern as a recipe or a template that provides a set of guidelines so that we can design our code so that it is easy to understand and easy to reuse and at the same time easy to maintain as well, right? Now, when it comes to using POM, the core idea is that we'll have a separate Java class for each web page in the application, right? So similar to how we create separate test classes for different test suites altogether, right? So we have a similar scenario over here where we create the page objects altogether, right? For example, we have the login page, we have the home page, we have the product page and so on and so forth, right? So once we define the page objects for each page based on its functionality, usually we can instantiate these page classes in our test cases as and when required. Okay, so as you can see over here, we have login page elements, home page elements, product page elements and all of them, the same set of elements can be used in the first test case, second test case, third test case and so on and so forth, right? And all of these test cases will be executed using Selenium altogether, right? Now, what is the advantage with this? Basically, using the page object model design patterns, it helps us maintain our test code by separating the page specific code, like locators and actions can be put inside a page object, right? It basically makes our test cleaner and easier to understand. Okay, and we also understood that the POM pattern can be implemented in two ways, and we have already discussed the simple approach part. Okay, now for the scope of this particular session, we'll look at how to implement the POM using another approach, that is the page factory approach. Okay, and to basically elaborate, the page factory can be thought of as a type of design pattern, and it is essentially a more enhanced way of implementing the page object model, right? And going forward, we'll get to know the advantages and disadvantages of both the approaches as well. Okay, right? Basically, in this particular approach, using the page factory, we use a class called as page factory provided by Selenium. Okay, so the approach is also called as page factory, and the class name is also page factory, right? Now, this page factory class is a type of class which is used to implement the page object model using the page factory design pattern. Okay, it serves as kind of like a central place for declaring and initializing web elements of a specific web page. Okay, so it provides annotations to locate elements directly in the page class. That is, we don't need to explicitly write a driver.find element by and so on and so forth, right? So in simple terms, by using these annotations @find by, @find by and so on and so forth, this page factory class, it automates and simplifies the process of locating and interacting with web elements. Okay, so as I just mentioned, there are two commonly used annotations, the find by and the find bys. There are more such annotations available and the details will be available for you in the cheat sheet. Okay, so let's start by understanding this find by annotation. Okay, @find by. So this annotation is used to declare and initialize a web element using different locators. Okay, so in simple terms, you can think of it like this. It takes various locator strategies. It could be ID, name, class name, CSS, XPath, etc., right? So it takes various locator strategies as parameters along with the value of the locator. Okay, so the typical syntax will look something like this, right? We'll write @find by, where F and B are capital. In the brackets, we'll write locator strategy equal to value. Okay, and then we'll follow it up with web element space element. Okay, so usually this web element space element part is written as a separate line. Okay, but in this example, we are writing it in a single line altogether. Okay, so here what happens is the @find by annotation is used to declare and initialize a web element called as element, as you can see over there, right? And this locator strategy parameter will be replaced with the actual locator strategy. Let's say, for example, ID equal to value, name equal to value, class name equal to value, and so on and so forth, right? And obviously the value will be replaced with the corresponding locator value. Okay, right? So let's say if we consider our login page test scenario itself, we have three elements altogether, right? So we have the username element, we have the password element, and the login button element altogether. Okay, so in a generic scenario, we'll usually initiate the web driver. We'll write web driver space driver semicolon, right? And then we'll use it to say driver.find element brackets by.id equal to something something and so on and so forth, right? So that is the traditional way that we use. But here, when you apply the page factory concept, we can directly use the @find by notation, and as simple as that, we'll simply write @find by of ID equal to username followed by web element space username element. Similarly, ID equal to password, web element password element. Similarly, class name equal to login hyphen button, web element submit button element, and so on and so forth, right? So basically, what we are doing over here is, if you're observed over here, by using these annotations, we are declaring the web elements, not just the locators. We are declaring the web elements itself. Okay, and as you can see here on the left, we have the earlier scenario where we used page objects, and on the right we have the page factory approach, right? And you can see how well organized our code has become. Earlier we'll be like by username locator equal to by.id of username, and then you'll write write another method saying public void enter username and so on and so forth. Then you'll write driver.find element of something something, right? Instead of that, we are directly writing @find by, in brackets we are mentioning that id equal to username and web element username element and so on and so forth, right? So basically when you're working with this @find by annotation, we can directly use the methods like send keys off, click off, and so on and so forth when you're interacting with the web elements. Okay, we don't need to explicitly call the driver.find element method every time we want to it. Okay, so by now we have understood a basic overview of the page factory class and what are the available annotations altogether, right? So let's take a look at how we can implement POM, the page object model, using page factory. Okay, that is, in the previous session we successfully implemented the POM using a simple approach to automate the test for the login page for our application, right? So in this particular session we'll focus on implementing the page object model using our page factory. Okay, so the page factory method will be applied over here to automate the test for the login page of our application. All right, so as usual we have provided you with the initial code in the reading material, and all you have to do is download it and open it with your IDE. Okay, just make sure that you have updated the part to the Chrome driver, which is very, very important. All right, and this is how our initial code will look like. We'll have the login page test.java, our test case class altogether, right? And once we execute it, both the successful and the failed login cases should be executed accordingly. Okay, so let's take a look at it as such. All right, so here we are in our code. Okay, so as you can see over here, we have all the necessary import statements mentioned over here, right? So let's just quickly reorganize them a little. So we have import pages.login page and all that stuff. Okay, and here we have instantiated all the necessary things, and here we have provided the necessary data. This is our first test case. This is our second test case. Login with valid credentials, login with invalid credentials altogether, right? So when you want to run this, as we already know, we just need to click on this run button, and once we click on this, let's see what happens. Okay. All right, so as you can see over here on the left side, we can see that all the three test cases have been executed successfully. Okay, right? Let's get back. All right, so we executed our code and we could see that all the previous tests were executed successfully. Okay, now if you look at the test steps that are involved in testing the login page using the page factory approach. So firstly, we'll have to create a page class as usual, right? And then we'll use the @find by annotation to locate the web elements. Remember, we are just locating them. We are not interacting with them yet. Okay, right? And then we'll define the methods to perform actions on the web elements. Then we'll initialize the web driver and the elements using page factory. Okay, and then finally we'll use the page object in our test class. Okay, so it's a simple 5 steps altogether. Let's start off with creating a page class, and basically we need to create a new class file which will represent the page that we want to interact with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and create it all together, right? So here we are. Let me just quickly minimize this part, and here under the Java folder we have another package which is pages, right? We'll just right click on it, go to new Java class, and inside that, let's say we want to mention it as login. Let's call it login page using page factory. Okay, so we can just mention it as login page using page factory. Once again, these names are variables. You can name it according to the test that you're running. Okay, right? So let me just click on OK, and this is where we have our new class file, right? So this is where our page object model page factory thing will be written. Okay, so this is how the initial code looks like. Let me just save it, and let's get back. All right, so basically what we have done is we have gone ahead and created another class to represent the login page in the page factory as we did in a simple POM. Okay, so this is how our initial code looked like. Okay, next we need to start using the @find by annotation to locate the required web elements. All right, so basically we know that @find by is an annotation which is used in page factory, right? This is used to locate and declare the web elements using different locators. Okay, so this basically replaces the way we located elements using the simple POM, right? So in the context of the @find by annotation in Selenium, basically there are two primary ways that we can use this. Okay, so you can either directly specify a locator strategy. It could be ID, XPath, CSS, and so on and so forth, followed by its corresponding value. Or there is another approach of using how and using as keywords. Okay, so let's look at the first approach first. That is directly specifying the locator strategy such as ID, XPath, CSS, and so on and so forth. Right? The syntax will be something like this. We'll write @find by in the brackets. We'll mention the locator strategy equal to value, followed by web element space element. Okay, though the statement is written in both the ways as shown over here, you can either write all of that in a single statement, or you can break it down where @find by locator strategy equal to value will be in one line, and you'll split it up into web element space element in the another line. Okay, so basically both single line and split line approaches are valid, and both of them are acceptable. The choice between them often comes down to the style of coding that you want to follow. Okay, so most commonly the split line approach is used, so we will also be following that. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the second way to use the find by annotation, that is by specifying how and using. Okay, so with this particular kind of method, you will tell the code how to find an element by using certain instructions from a specific set of options. Okay, moreover, in the context of the @find by annotation in the Selenium WebDrivers page factory, how and using are the keywords that have specific meanings. Okay, so how basically is used to specify the locator strategy that we want to use. It could be how.id, how.xpath, how.css, and so on and so forth. And similarly, using is used to provide the value associated with the locator strategy. It is the information that helps Selenium locate the specific web elements on the page. All right, and the syntax will be something like this. You'll mention @find by, in the brackets you'll mention how equal to how dot locator strategy, comma, using locator value. All right, followed by web element space element. If you basically break it down in this particular example, the @find by annotation is used to declare and initialize a web element named element, which is why we have web element space element in the second line. The how part basically specifies the locator strategy like id, xpath, etc., etc. And using the keyword using provides the value that is associated with that particular strategy. Let's say id equal to something something. Okay, so this basically helps Selenium locate and interact with the mentioned web element on the page using the provided locator strategy and value. Right. So the syntax will look something like this. Let's say we use the direct locator strategy for the approach for the username element altogether, right? So we'll write @find by id equal to username, and we'll follow it up by web element space username element. All right. Similarly, let's say we use the how and using approach for the password element. The syntax will be @find by, in the brackets we'll mention how equal to how dot id. Okay, so we are basically telling our program that you need to locate an element how using the id, and how do you identify it using the password as a value. Okay, so we'll mention how equal to how dot id using equal to password. Okay, and then we'll follow it up by web element password element altogether. So if you observe, we have used both the ways over here in our code. Basically, you can use any of the ways to declare the web elements. It depends on your preference altogether. But for either of the cases, let it be directly using the locator strategy or by using the how and using approach, we will need to import the corresponding classes, right? Which is why on the top we have written org.openqa selenium support find by, and we have similarly imported the how class. And because we are working with web elements, we'll also have to import the web element class as well. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, we can use either of the approaches. Here, for the scope of our code for this particular session, we'll be using both. Okay, and moving on, let's apply the same thing to the login button and error message elements as well, right? So we'll have @find by how equal to how dot class name using login button for the login button part, and how dot class name using equal to error hyphen message for the error message element part. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's update our code with these parts. Okay, all right, so basically we are in our id, and we'll just quickly import the necessary classes. So we'll leave the package pages over here, and in this we'll just quickly import the necessary classes, right? So we'll write import, because we are working with find by, so we'll write org openqa selenium, and because we are basically working with web elements, let's import that first. Okay, then we'll write import org .openqa selenium, and under that we'll use the support class. Let's just write support over here, and as part of that we want the find by. Okay, so we'll use the find by class, and similarly we'll import another one. So we'll write import org .openqa selenium support. This time we'll just use the how class. Okay, so we need to import web element, find by, and how as well, right? So we'll just write how. As you can see over here, it directly suggests it, and we'll just quickly remove a little bit of this extra space. And now let's say if we want to use the direct locator strategy approach for the username element, right? So we'll just simply write we'll just write @find by. Okay, and in the brackets, how do we want to find it? Using the id, where the value for the id is username. Okay, we already know that the @find by is username, followed by web element space username element. Okay, so we just defined it all together, right? Similarly, let's say we use the how and using approach for the password, login button, and the error message elements. How do we write it? We'll just quickly write @find by, in the brackets we'll write how equal to how dot id. Oh yeah, let's make sure that this is how you write it. Okay, so the h should be capital, the rest of the letters should be small. All right, so in case if at all you have any kind of doubt on how exactly you can write these and all, you can refer to the cheat sheet. In general, here the prompt also tells you which thing you can use. Okay, so be very very careful when you're using the syntax, especially when you're using the default things like this. Okay, for example, this time I just want to use the id part, so I'll write how dot id, right? And we'll just give it a comma, and using what we want to identify it using an identifier called as password. Okay, and then we want to assign it to another web element called as let's call it password element. Okay, right, so let's give it a semicolon. Similarly, we want the same thing to be applied to the login button. Basically, let's call it submit button element, right? So we'll just write @find by, in the brackets we'll write how equal to how dot class name, where we want to use let's write using equal to, let's say the class name is login hyphen button. Okay, so in case if you have any doubt on this particular part, you can always revisit the website, right click on it, inspect element, and locate the class name altogether, right? So because we have worked with this particular login page a lot of times, I'm just going ahead with memory. Okay, so I'll write login hyphen button. All right, and then once again we'll just use web element to define another one. Let's call it submit button element. Okay, so similarly we'll write @find by. right? So we'll write find by how. How do we want to find it? Using the how dot class name, right? So we'll just write class name, comma, how do we want to find it? Using the class name called as error hyphen message, right? So if you remember, we had error hyphen message for the error message element, right? So we'll write error hyphen message, and in this we'll write web element. We'll just call it let's say error message element. Okay, so we have basically defined the necessary elements altogether. We have defined the elements, not just the locators. We have defined the elements altogether. Okay, so let's save the code and let's get back. Okay, so what we have basically done is we have defined the @find by annotation to locate the specific web elements altogether, right? So that is, think of it like this: we have located the specific web elements. What's the next step? We just need to interact with them, right? So the next step is to define the methods needed to perform specific actions on the web elements. That is, we need to define a method for each action that we are going to perform on our page, right? And these methods are very similar to those that we created in the standard POM approach, as the simple POM approach, right? So we'll simply need to write public void enter username of string username for username, and then we'll write username.send keys of username. Similarly, public void enter password string password, password.send keys of password, and so on and so forth. For the same for the login button as well. Okay, so to implement the login process for convenience, we can define an additional method that combines the actions required for the login process, and we can simply write the calls over here. Okay, so this basically makes our test simpler and easier to read as well, right? For that, we'll have to write the code something as this: public void login to application. In the brackets, we'll mention string username, string password, and then followed by username element.send keys, password element.send keys, submit button element.click, and so on and so forth, right? Now, we know that when pages load, the elements on the pages take some time to be visible, right? So we'll basically define another wait mechanism for the same, right? For that, we'll have to import the necessary packages, and we'll have to write our code accordingly. Okay, as you can see over here, we have written a couple of import statements followed by instantiation and followed by the mentions as well, right? Finally, we'll also update the get error message method as well. Okay, so let's try this out one by one. All right, so here we are in our code. So let me just quickly add a couple of lines so that we can scroll down. Okay, so now what do we know? We have basically already defined the locators for each and every element altogether, right? So we just need to add methods for each of the required actions. So what we'll do is we'll just simply go over here. We'll write public void. Okay, and let's say we want to enter the username, so we'll just call the same method with the same name. Okay, so we'll write username, and in the brackets, right, so we'll write string username. Okay, we'll just give it a semicolon over here. Oh, sorry. We just need to give a flower brackets over here, right? And we'll write username element, the one that we have defined earlier. We'll send the keys where whatever string is taken as an argument over here, it will be sent as a parameter over here, right? So we'll just write username over here. And let me just quickly copy this, and we'll just quickly replicate this entire thing for the password element and the login button element as well, right? So we'll just quickly, paste it over here. This time, instead of entering the username, we'll just call it enter password. Okay, so we'll write enter password, string password, and this time we want to send the password element. So let's write password element dot send keys of this password. Okay, similarly, we'll have another method which basically would click on the login button, right? So we'll write public void, let's call it click on login button. Okay, and we'll just define the method like this, and inside this what we'll do is we have the submit button element, right? So we'll just click on it, right? So we'll just write click submit button element dot click. Okay, and once done, to implement the login process after the submit button is done, we need to combine all of these things and write the function calls or method calls over here, right? For that, what we'll do is we'll just let me just scroll down a little bit, and here what we'll do is we'll write public, right? We'll write void login to application. Okay, where we'll send a string username and string password as well, right? So we'll write string password. Okay, and inside this what we'll do is we'll write function calls or method calls for each and every element that is there, right? So for example, username element dot send keys of, we'll just write username over here. Similarly, password element dot, let me just remove this part, dot send keys of password, right? So we'll just write, similarly we'll have submit button element dot click, right? So basically, when this login to application method is called with whatever username and whatever password we have given it, it will execute all the three steps: username element dot send keys, password element dot send keys, and submit button element dot click, and so on and so forth, right? So once we have defined this, and then because we are interacting with the web elements and we want our code to wait before grabbing the error message, we'll first import the necessary classes as well, right? So we want our program to wait until the error message is visible on the page. Okay, because we also have an login with invalid credentials test case, right? So what we'll do is just let me just remove this part. This is an unnecessary import statement. Okay, now what do we need to import? We need to first import the WebDriver, because we want our WebDriver to wait for a while, and at the same time we want it to wait until the expected conditions are met, and then we want it to wait for a particular duration, right? So what we'll do is we'll import the necessary classes over here. We'll write import org dot OpenQA Selenium, and as part of that we will have the support, and as part of that we'll have UI, and as part of that we'll have WebDriver wait. Okay, now when the WebDriver needs to wait, we also need a WebDriver to be present, right? So what we'll do is we'll import we'll just import org dot OpenQA Selenium, and as part of that we'll also import the WebDriver. We also want the expected conditions part, so we'll write import org dot OpenQA Selenium, and as part of that we want the support. Let's just remove that, support.ui.expected conditions. Okay, similarly we also want the java.time.duration part. Okay, so we'll write import java.time.duration. Okay, and because for the error statement we will also need the by class, right? So we'll have to import that as well, right? So we'll write import open org dot OpenQA dot Selenium dot by. Okay, so basically what we are doing is going forward, whatever import statement, whatever classes we'll be using, I'm importing it right now. Okay, you can also do it on a case-to-case basis as well, right? So once this is done, all we need to do is we need to define and instantiate everything all together, right? So basically we want to instantiate the WebDriver and the wait mechanisms as the first thing, right? So we'll basically instantiate them inside this particular login page using page factory class, right? So we'll just simply write public class login page factory, and here we'll just simply mention WebDriver driver. All right, so we'll just give it a semicolon, and then we also want to instantiate the WebDriver wait mechanism, so we'll call it wait, and we'll put a semicolon over here, right? So these things are instantiated now. We'll use these instances to define the corresponding actions. Okay, so we have the element declarations over here before the methods. So this is where we'll add our another function altogether, right? So we'll write public, let's call it login page using page factory. Okay, and here inside this we'll write WebDriver space driver. Okay, so we'll write driver over here. Inside this, what we'll do is we basically need to tell our program that whatever driver we are considering will be considered for this instance of the program, right? So which is why we'll write this dot driver equal to driver. Okay, so we'll write driver over here, we'll put a semicolon, and similarly this dot wait, we need to instantiate this also, right? So we'll write new. All we need to do is we need our WebDriver wait to ask the driver to wait for a duration of particular seconds, right? So we'll write duration of seconds, and as usual let's mention it 10, right? So you can also change this into 20, 30 and so on and so forth, right? So what we have basically done is we have imported the necessary classes and we have instantiated, we have created new instances of the driver and the wait mechanisms. Okay, and finally to get the error message we'll have to add our code after the login to application method, right? So all we need to do is we'll write a public string. Remember, it returns a string value, so we are using string. Okay, so let's call it get error message. Okay, and inside that we just need to make sure that our code waits until a particular expected conditions are matched. And what are the expected conditions? The visibility of element located by, this is why we had to use the by locator, right? So by class name. Okay, so we'll use by dot class name of where the class name is error hyphen message. Okay, right? So we'll just add a semicolon over here just to make sure that there are no errors altogether. And once this is grabbed, once this thing is grabbed, we need to return the error message element dot get text. Okay, right? So basically what we have done is we have asked it to wait until this particular element is visible, and then we'll return the error message element dot get text. Okay, so we're given it a semicolon, we'll save the code and let's get back. Okay, right. All right, so till now we have effectively defined our code for locating the web elements and their corresponding actions that we need to perform on them. Okay, next we need to initialize the web elements using page factory. So basically in Selenium, the page factory class provides something called as an init element method for initializing all the web elements. Okay, so it's called init elements. So where I and IT are small, E is capital, and the rest of the characters are small. Okay, and the syntax looks something like this: page factory, where P and F are capital, dot init elements of driver comma this. So here page factory is a class that provides a set of methods for initializing the web elements and page objects. Okay, and similarly the init elements method takes care of initializing our web elements as defined by the @findby or @findby annotations. Okay, and here driver is basically the web driver instance, which is our Chrome driver. Okay, so we use this instance to locate the elements on the web page. And here in this scenario, this keyword, the one that you see over here, it refers to the current class object, which is used to define the context in which the field should be initialized. Okay, on the whole, this entire thing will initialize the web elements when a new instance of the login page using page factory method is created. Okay, that is when you call page factory dot init element of driver comma this, what happens is Selenium scans through the entire class. It finds the fields with @findby annotations and associates those fields with their respective web elements on the web page. Okay, so this basically allows you to interact with these elements using the methods that are provided by the web element class. It could be send keys, click, or anything as such. Okay, basically to put it in a nutshell, when you mention page factory dot init elements and so on and so forth, Selenium reads through the code, finds the elements where we have written find by, and then it basically allows us to interact with the elements. Okay, so using this, we won't need to write driver dot find element by and so on and so forth every time. Okay, right now. An important point over here that we need to remember is it will just initialize the web element fields. It won't actually search the DOM for the elements immediately. It will just initialize it. Okay, right? So let's add this to our code and move forward. Okay, right. All right, so basically we need to import the page factory class first. Remember, page factory is a class in this scenario, so we'll have to import it as well. So we'll just quickly, write import, right? And how do we import it? Org dot openqa selenium, and here we have support, and under that we have page factory, right? So let's just write page factory, and here we can see it. We'll give it a semicolon, right? And now because we have imported a particular class, we'll have to initialize the imported class or instantiate it. Okay, so we'll just go to the corresponding method, where as you can see over here, login page using page factory driver. Here we'll just simply write the relevant code altogether, right? So we'll write page factory dot init elements of, we'll just initialize the driver with the current context. Okay, so we'll just mention it as this. All right, so we'll just quickly save the code and let's get back. All right, so to be able to do that, we basically, what we have done is we have exactly initialized the relevant elements altogether, and to be able to use the page object in our test class, we need to use we basically will have to update our login page test.java so that we can import and use the login page using page factory class that we have created just now. Okay, right, so let's try that out as well. All right, so we'll just quickly go to login page test.java, and if you open this, let me just open up all the things that are collapsed. All right, so as you can see over here, we have imported pages.login page over here, right? So basically we need to import pages.login page using page factory, because this is the test case that we are considering right now. Okay, right, so what we'll do is, instead of importing pages.login page, I'll just import pages.login page using page factory. Okay, now we have basically imported the new page factory altogether. So what we'll do is we'll use the same thing over here and create a new instance for this. All right, so we'll use login page using page factory followed by the same thing. For safety's sake, what I'll do is I'll just change the capitalization over here, right? So once we have imported and initialized it or instantiated it, we'll just need to update the setup method to have the new class that we have created, right? Obvious. So we'll just quickly go so another interesting thing over here before I actually show you the setup method part is, a beautiful thing about this IDE is, every time you make a change and there could be an error or there is a small change that is needed, you will see the code getting highlighted in red. Okay, because for example, till now we have been using login page dot something something, right? But this time what we have done is we have updated that to login page using page factory and so on and so forth, which is why every time login page is mentioned, it is shown in red because it has not been imported at all. Okay, so we need to fix that, right? So we'll just quickly go to setup. As you can see over here, login page equal to new login page of driver and so on and so forth, right? So what we'll do is we'll just quickly copy this. Okay, so this is basically the instance that we have created just now. Instead of login page, we'll just paste it over here. Login page using page factory equal to new login page using page factory of driver. Okay, so we'll just update it accordingly, right? So every time you see a red, we can just make the fixes accordingly, right? And here you'll be able to see a detailed information on what exactly is the error. So for example, it says cannot resolve simple login page and so on and so forth, which basically translates to you have not imported it right now. Okay, so we'll just replace it using the same thing. So everywhere we have login page, we'll just replace it using login page using page factory, login page using page factory, and so on and so forth, right? So we'll just quickly save it. All right, so what have we done so far? Basically, we have updated our entire code to import the login page using page factory.java method. Okay, the class that we have created in the pages package. Okay, so let's run this code. Let's see what happens. All right, so we'll just click on this run login page test and let's see what happens. All right, so as you can see over here, all the 3 test cases have been executed successfully, and how we have implemented the page factory approach of using the page object model. Okay, right, let's get back. All right, and we have basically updated all the instances. So basically what we have done is we have imported the login page using page factory class that we have created just now, and then we updated all the relevant instances, that is in the login with valid credentials test case and with the login with invalid credentials test case. We have updated the relevant instances, and in the case of error message as well, we have updated the instance altogether, right? And finally, when we executed the code, we were able to run all the tests as expected. Okay, so till now we have understood how to use the page factory class to implement the page object model. Okay, so if you look at the advantages that it gives us, so one thing is that with page factory, our code becomes more organized and more easy to read, right? Because elements are declared at the top of the class. It makes it easier to see what elements does a page consist of, right? And at the same time, since the @find by annotations are kind of like standard usage, they make the code more cleaner and they make it easier to understand as well, right? Basically, there is better readability as well. And another interesting thing about the page factory design pattern and the find by annotation is that Selenium in this particular scenario, it uses something called as a lazy loading approach to basically defer the search for the element until we actually try to interact with it. Okay, that is, lazy loading is a technique where the actual search and location of a web element on a web page is put on hold. It is paused until the point where you try to interact with it. Okay, so I'll try to elaborate this in a much better way. That is, when you declare a particular web element using annotations like @find by within a page object class, Selenium does not immediately search for that element on the page. Instead of that, it will pause the searching part until and unless you perform an action on the element. Let's say you want to you write send keys or click and so on and so forth. Only when that action part is executed, only then Selenium will go, it will find out the element, then interact with it, and then give you the response. Okay, so this entire approach is called as lazy loading. Okay, right, and that is why the find by annotation that we write, it does not search the DOM for the elements immediately, and that is exactly why we don't get an error when declaring an error message even before it appears on the DOM. Okay, right, moving on. Another interesting annotation that we have in the page factory design pattern is the @cache lookup annotation. Okay, you can call it cache, and so on and so forth. Basically, @cache to optimize the performance of locating the web elements by caching them. Okay, that is, when you use @cache lookup along with the @find by annotation, Selenium will locate the element first time. Okay, so for the first time you interact with the element, Selenium will locate it, and then it will store the reference in its memory. Okay, so this basically is called as a cache reference, and it can improve the test execution speed altogether. Okay, so every time, the first time you interact with the element, Selenium will by default locate it, it will identify it, it will perform actions on it, and then after the first iteration, it will store the reference in its memory. Okay, and every time, the next time you want to interact with it, the same element can be referred from the cache reference. Okay, so this is usually preferred when we are referring to the same web element multiple times, and because we don't need to load the element every time, we can use the @cache lookup annotation. Okay, so this particular annotation is commonly used in combination with the @find by and @find by annotation to store the element in the memory once it is located. Okay, and as a result, when you're using this, our program will not check this web element each and every time on the web page, right? This basically gives us high performance, right? But remember, we need to use this thing, this @cache lookup annotation, only and only when we are pretty sure the web element will not change, right? So if the web element keeps on changing, there is no point in storing it in the memory. Okay, so let's take an example to understand this better, right? So think of it like this. Consider an application where each and every test case requires a login operation, right? So using this @cache lookup, we can store the web elements in cache memory right after reading them for the first time. Okay, and to do that, all we need to do is add the @cache lookup annotation below the place where you mention @find by id equal to username, right? For example, we have written @find by, in the brackets we have mentioned id equal to username, followed by we have written @cache lookup. So the first time this username element will be located, and that reference will be stored in the cache lookup memory. Okay, and the next time we want to interact with it, we can directly refer it from the cache memory altogether, right? So as you can see in the code. So by now we have understood the different ways in which we can implement the page object model, right? So there's the simple approach, which is a very standard one, and then we also used a page factory approach as well, right? Okay, so to quickly summarize what we have learned in this particular session, we looked at a